Welcome to the webinar, Charting 2024 with Lessons from 2023. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules. I know that everyone is very busy. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to access it at a later time. Please use the Q&A box and the chat box if you have any questions throughout the webinar. This past year has really been full of challenges with great technology, including some that are unsure or undetermined paths, especially when we all heard about AI and it was just about everywhere. My name is Carl Udler, and I'm on the marketing side here at Hughes. I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Tang, our lead business technologist. Today, we will talk about what we've heard and learned throughout the year and provide some thoughts for 2024. Tim and I work very closely with our customers, with industry groups, with conferences and analysts, and have a long and storied history here at Hughes. So with that as a backdrop, let's begin. Tim?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation here today. Before we get into all the content, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and express some gratitude to a large number of executives who have really been very generous with their time and with their expertise. So much of what we're going to be talking about here today comes from the benefit of being able to really spend some quality time talking about some of the meaningful challenges that are facing the various industries that we're going to be covering and touching on today. In my role here at Hughes, I have the privilege of being able to attend a lot of different types of conferences, from the National Retail Federation, the National Association of Convenience Store, MERTech, FS Tech, and the like. In these conferences, the conference programming is one source of understanding kind of what is going on, what's important to the attendees. But I would also say that it's the attendees and being able to engage with them one-on-one over the meals during the social breaks where I get a lot of insight as to really understanding what's real and what's not real too as well. I also spend a lot of time with as many suppliers as I can to understand how those who are trying to monetize and solutions in the industry are faring too as well. So much of what we're talking about today is really the amalgamation of the conferences, the attendees, and the suppliers that I've had the opportunity to engage with. In addition, there's been a lot of time spent in the associations, the IFBTA, the Restaurant Technology Network, as well as Connexus too as well. A lot of these associations will have regular, routine, even bi-weekly kind of work groups or committee meetings, trying to solve meaningful problems and challenges. It's an opportunity where we get, as suppliers, retail, restaurant executives, kind of come together to try to tackle some of the challenges that are facing the industry at large. And this, too, is also a very helpful way to understand what's real and not. When we put all this together, what I'm really after is a point of saturation, a point where I start to hear the same kinds of themes over and over again. It's at that point that I feel like I'm prepared to hear what's new, to hear and to see and to focus on where the new thinking is. And we hope to share a lot of that with you today.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Tim. Let's go ahead and just start with some general questions, Tim, about what you saw over the last year, what some big trends were, and let's just start at a very high level like that, maybe some strategies that you saw.
So, in order to solve a problem, it's first a matter of understanding the problem. And usually where I go is to the big three. I start with the high cost of inflation, the labor shortage, as well as the shrinking customer wallet. When you put these three together, it's a perfect storm in terms of challenges that are facing retailers, restaurants, and the like. After that, what's really interesting to me is the cross-industry competition that's taking place. A great example of that would be the looking at what's happening between the convenience store market, the restaurants, the QSRs, the C-stores, the gas station, the grocery, as well as the dollar stores too as well. They're all fighting for the same share of stomach, the same share of wallet. And so you have these different industries now competing with each other in ways that before weren't seen. And so when you have on top of the labor shortage, inflation, and the shrinking customer wallet, an increased level of competition, not only from competitors inside the industry, but from also outside the industry, it causes a greater need, a greater challenge in terms of how to operate the restaurant's profitability. The other problem, the third element of the stool that I would pay a lot of attention to, is the emerging regulations. We have from a data privacy, cybersecurity perspective, we have new regulations that are coming out, even from an AI perspective too, as well. And it's quite apparent. Cybersecurity is a little bit more well formed. We've had decades to kind of understand from a PCI perspective what needs to be done. But when we look at data privacy and AI, a lot of those regulations are kind of new and very young, very immature, and very at the very early stages, which means that a lot of things aren't quite clear, and a lot of things are changing quite rapidly and have fairly meaningful impact for the retailer as well as for the consumer. So it's these three. It's the inflation, labor shortage, and the shrinking customer wallet. It's the cross-industry competition, but it's also the emerging regulations that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, there's even a couple other regulations I've heard of coming out of the IFA, and that is the increase in minimum wage that's affecting just about everyone out there. And then also the joint employer legislation that's come out, and everyone's battling that. It affects the employer, the franchisor, the franchisee, the retail owner, and just about everyone in between. So those are things that have happened this year that we really need to keep an eye on and learn from, and apply to 2024.
I think the joint employer is a pretty interesting one in the sense that it kind of restricts what a franchisor is able to do for their franchisees. And so when we talk about threats to the industry, such as cybersecurity and the like, a lot of those solutions can't be mandated. It's a franchisor can make recommendations, but they can't go as far as mandating the solutions. And so you still have this level of independence and choice that the franchisee maintains. And many of them are very ill prepared to protect themselves from all the threats that are out there.
Interesting. So how do you think about the problem, right? We know the certain ideas that you laid out, the three key areas. We know there's a lot of external impact that influences everything. How would you think about it and start to see where it goes within each type of vertical that we work in?
You know, I start with pain. You know, many industries, the convenience store, some restaurants too as well, are very resistant to change.
Mm.
It's uncomfortable, it's expensive, it's undesirable in many cases, and so there's a desire not to change. And really, when change happens, it's when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of making the change. And so when we talk about the pain points in the industry, high inflation, labor shortage, and the shrinking customer wallet, the regulations and the competition, there is a smaller window of opportunity now in terms of being able to run a business profitably. And so because of that now, we are facing increased levels of pain. And it's when those pains increase that you see a lot of change taking place. And so I'm paying a lot of attention right now when we think about it is how do we navigate then the desire to kind of get out of the pain points that we're facing today. There's a couple of things that kind of come to mind quickly. One is it when things are going well, you can afford to stay the same because you're somewhat fat. You can tolerate uh, the uh, the difficulties and the challenge because there's a high level of margin of profitability. When things start to shrink down and that window of profitability narrows, now you need to learn how to improve the business, operate with greater specificity to the needs of the market and to the ability to improve your operational processes and your engagement with your consumers. And so what that speaks to and begs for is a new understanding of the data that runs into your store. How do I understand what's happening in the store and what's not happening in the store, and understand what is normal and what is not normal to a large extent? And so when we think about the problem today, it's a question of how do I get smarter now about operating the stores? There's a couple things to offer here. the first one is that it's quite remarkable. So I forget which show. It was a keynote speaker basically confessing to the whole audience, I have no wherewithal and internal ability to do all of the tech strategy planning that everybody else has to do. And so my technology strategy is, quite frankly, is taking it from other people. They spend an awful lot of time at Walmart studying everything about what Walmart does and does not do, and the like, and tries to imitate and mimic, others who do have deep pockets and greater resources to actually develop their tech strategy. I think the expertise of others can also be found in other buckets too as well. In addition to your competitors and in addition to other industries, you can look at frameworks. The the there's this is what I'm speaking to is the world of the enterprise architect. What's really interesting about this space is it's a very established space. Typically, it's reserved for the larger enterprises that have very established IT shops and very deep pockets and a lot of resources. But what's interesting this past year and the year previous is that some of the associations now, the trade organizations, for example, the Restaurant Technology Network, have been really trying to bridge that gap and make those architectures and those frameworks more accessible to the smaller kind of restaurant operators and the like. And so there are frameworks that are available that really just provide an outline, if you will, of all the different dimensions of the business. And it provides an organized way of thinking about your business, thinking about what, from a marketing perspective, from a customer engagement perspective, from a store operations, just going through every dimension of your business and being able to understand how do you stack up to your competitors? How do you stack up in terms of, are you performing to the levels that you want to be? And so I encourage you to start thinking and looking at some of these frameworks. With the Restaurant Technology Networks framework is available to you, and it can be a very useful tool not only for taking inventory and assessing kind of where you stand today. It can also be a very useful tool for brainstorming your roadmap and how you want to engage down the road. Frameworks are not only
where would someone go to get the RTN framework that you just mentioned?
It's on their website. And actually a lot of these frameworks that I'm talking about are remarkably, they're freely available. So the restauranttechnologynetwork.com, that would be a good place to start. There are other frameworks also that will be quite relevant and also quite helpful. From a cybersecurity perspective, you have the MITRE framework. From a PCI perspective, you have extensive compliance requirements and like. These two can actually provide guidance on how you need to set up your business in order to kind of deal with not only your day-to-day operations, but even the potential cyber threats that are coming your way. So my encouragement to you is to look at the frameworks that are coming from the industry associations themselves. It doesn't just have to be inside your industry. The restaurant industry one is a pretty generic one, and it's pretty useful for retailers and probably healthcare and banking too as well, when you start thinking about customer care and employee engagement and those kinds of elements then too as well. The last one I would leave with you is particularly specifically as it relates to AI. There have been a number of kind of regulatory concerns now about AI in terms of all the attention. National Retail Federation has actually just recently issued their structure for understanding and they've kind of broken out AI into kind of 4 buckets: governance and risk management, customer engagement and trust, workforce application, and then business partner accountability. So it's these kinds of tools that you can use to actually kind of compare and assess, your standings of your business. These frameworks, if you will, provide a starting point for understanding what you need to be thinking about, how your business, and my encouragement here is to embrace a lot of them, take what's necessary and what's relevant, and just you can put aside the rest. But it's a useful way of stimulating your thinking and being able to understand what you need to do next.
So we've talked about frameworks. We've talked about AI. We've talked about, well, we have to talk about AI since that's part of every discussion in 2023. We've talked about a lot of data and putting it all together. Talk to me about how AI can be used with the data that's collected, because we all know in retail stores, whether it's retail or a franchise location, a QSR, fast casual, that there are so many applications now in the store, not just the POS, not just the back office, but the loyalty, right? The credit card, the digital menu boards, the video cameras, the safes, the fryer and refrigeration monitors, the cameras that, that monitor what's going on in the store. How do you put that together and make some sense of it?
Yeah, there's a lot of technologies to choose from right now. And I think we always, particularly as it relates to innovation, and we always think of it's the holiday seasons, right? Bells and whistles, and we want to be very particular and very careful about buying something that's here today, gone tomorrow, or something that's going to be an investment today and not too useful tomorrow too as well. My encouragement in this space is to start with maybe a minimalist approach and start looking at kind of where can technology kind of best improve the business? Where has it demonstrated the kind of best bang for the buck? There are a number of technologies actually, as I think about to maybe kind of maybe take a moment and just kind of talk a little bit about the technologies that I'm particularly interested in today's world. Some of them are actually not that new. And particularly, I guess we go back to what are the challenges facing the business. One of the biggest drivers right now is that labor shortage, and it actually kind of relates to the high inflation and just the higher general operating costs of running a business now today. Because you can't, even if you could pay the higher minimum wage, you still can't get the employees, and so in many cases you're paying higher than the higher minimum wage, and you're still not able to find the employees. It really begs the need to pivot and to try to find some way of how do I keep my doors open? How do I meet my day-to-day business needs today? And so I see a lot of activity around actually older capabilities. So prior to COVID, when things were healthy, there was a lot of attention focused on the customer experience. I think a lot of that is still there and coming back. But more recently, in the past year or so, I think more of the attention has been focused on the back office side. So a lot of the technologies and the innovations there have been focused on what can I do to improve my store operations? I don't have as much control over the customers, whether they come into my store or not. I have a tremendous amount of control over my back office and how I run my store and the like. So how can I leverage that control to improve my operational processes? So a lot of it is, and we talk about AI, and we are going to, for the purposes of this webinar, we will use it in the generic sense that everybody has come to use it. It's not really AI in many cases. In many cases, it's machine learning, but we'll just do what everybody else is doing. So when I think about AI, and I think about, well, before we even get to that, RPA, robotic process automation, a lot of automation, trying to get the paperwork out of the restaurant, out of the store, so that you can free up your store manager to spend more time with the customers on the floor. If you don't have enough salespeople, you certainly don't want what few salespeople you do have, or store managers that you do have in the back office, trying to keep up with all the inventory and all the paperwork. You want all that automated as much as possible. Some of the technologies that are more leading edge that I'm very interested in are the natural language processing. You've seen a lot of headlines, I think, about the voice ordering in the drive-through menus. That's exciting because now you can actually take a person off the register and actually have them all focus on the food. In some cases, you're hearing great stories about some restaurants where the front line doesn't show up and it's just a store manager by themselves, and it's basically the natural language ordering taking in, and basically the store manager in the back office kitchen cooking all the food and selling all the food and delivering it to the customer. Natural language processing, though, has got another very interesting piece because we talked about the importance of data. We talked about the ability to run your business in a more precise type manner. And a large part of that is the ability to use data. And the exciting thing about natural language processing is it's democratizing data. It's basically taking your data now and making it more accessible to people who don't have the ability to run a SQL query and the like. They can just ask a question that says, what is the conditions of store 123 in comparison to all my other stores or the like, or how am I doing in terms of my profitability this week versus last week? And with natural language processing, we can take those generic questions and convert those into the appropriate queries and present then the results in the dashboard. So the exciting thing about natural language processing is not just so much the dictating from voice to text, but being able to translate now human questions into queries to make data more accessible to the larger portion of the corporate. And so when we talk about getting value, business value of data, I think natural language processing is a very effective key to unlocking some of that data. Very similar to that, another area that I'm paying a lot of attention to is computer vision. And very much, again, related to the labor shortage and saying, how do we uplift? If I don't have enough people working in the store or can't find enough employees, then how do I raise the quality of effort for the existing employees? And this actually speaks to a human question. I'm fascinated with not only technology, but the human side of it too as well. And when we think about human motivations, as the father of five, why is it that people don't really work too hard? They don't work hard when they don't get credit for the work that they do. And so one of the big challenges when you're in a store or a restaurant is you've got a frontline employee base where everybody's getting credit for whatever work is being done and it's not being attributed to the individual. The exciting thing about computer vision is it's elevating now the ability, in many cases, just using these same existing computer surveillance videos, cameras, and video DVRs that you already have in place for video surveillance services. But doing analysis now to be able to tell the difference between little Jimmy's effort and little Sally's effort, and to see how often little Jimmy engages with a consumer, or how often or how frequently does little Sally run out to restock the shelves and those kind of things. We have the ability now to basically be able to observe and attribute activity, store employee activity to the individual now. And I think this has some very interesting implications now for not only elevating the store, but actually even gamifying the role of the frontline employee. Now it's an understanding of I will get credit for the work that I do every time I clean the bathroom, every time I restock the shelves, every minute that I spend with a customer. And so now instead of running away from the customer and letting somebody else do it, I'll be motivated now to do my job. And so what's really interesting about this possibility is not only the effect that it has on the frontline employee, but also the opportunity for the store manager. And what I'm thinking about here is the real need is when we can't get enough labor of the frontline, it's even harder to get experienced labor. A 5-year seasoned store manager, district manager, regional manager, and the like. So at the store manager level, the question is how do I make that job simpler and easier to do? Well, if I have this computer vision ability now to get and attribute the workflows of my employees and the like, um, I can take that information now and feed it into dashboards that may take a responsible individual, somebody who can understand instructions and the like, and give them a job aid so that an inexperienced individual, but a responsible one, can perform with the same kind of expertise and competence of a 5-year seasoned store manager and the like. And so we're talking about a virtual store manager, somebody who can, with the right and appropriate job aids, be able to function with a higher quality, higher ability. And so I think there's some very exciting and interesting work that's taking place now, where if we can get the right data feeds now through computer vision, understanding what employees are doing, now we're going to have the ability to kind of simplify those roles and start to meet some of those labor requirements and labor challenges that we're seeing in the job space. And so I think the visualization of data, making data more accessible to the employees at large, to be able to add additional streams of data so that now we understand where the actual performance problems and the challenges are in the store operations, and then being able to interpret them and provide coaching and prompts to the store manager to improve the business are going to be some very exciting things, very near-term things that will be happening in 2024, and things that, because again, the pain is so great, the difficulty of finding labor is so challenging, that this will be a space that will be highly motivated to move rather quickly.
Wow, you touched on a lot. And so some of the things I've heard over the course of the year that lay very much into what you just talked about is if you're going to automate something, automate it on the back end so that your people are in the foreground talking with customers, right? Customer experience is huge. But then right next to that, you have employee experience, right? You're having trouble finding minimum wage plus employees, making sure that their experience at work, that they're able to do the job, they're able to interact with the customers. So you have a win-win between the customer and the employee and the seasoned manager who may be on site, who may be off site, and using all the collected data from all the systems that are in the store to kind of bring it all together. I think this year we see AI as a standalone system that is plugging into certain areas. And I know here we have AI built into a lot of our systems that can foresee and predict issues in the future and just proactively take advantage of that and act on it before something even happens.
And one of the things to also think about there is it's not only the implications for the individual store, but it's also implications for the whole system at large.
Mhm.
Because now when we can actually manage a store with this kind of objectivity, think about a lot of the challenges that often take place between a store manager and their frontline employees, the complaints about bias or being unfair or giving, privileges to people who don't deserve it and the like. Well, now we can let the data speak for itself. And so we have a situation now where the data kind of lays out how people are individually performing, where they can improve, how they can improve,
Mhm.
and the like. So what's exciting about what we can do with these kinds of technologies and solutions is not only for the individual store, but actually how we can actually manage the system at large, at scale, too, as well.
So, how would you pivot from there and, staying within the items you just talked about, including the regulations, making sure that risk is mitigated with all the regulations that are out there. How would you go about creating capacity for some of this digital transformation that we've been hinting at and putting it all together in a nice package?
I think what this really speaks to, and this is probably one of my favorite questions actually when I think about and one that I go to quite often, because in many cases we're in a conference where you see the latest and greatest technologies a from all the companies putting their best foot forward, and you're trying very hard now to try to understand what's real and what's not real. I remember one National Restaurant Association show. This was 5 years ago, and we were completely astounded at just the sheer magnitude of all the technologies that were available to us. And I was talking to one restaurant CIO, and I was asking him, how do you make sense of all this? I mean, we got literally rows and rows of different technologies, everything from AI cookware to brand new intelligent point of sales and the like. And he said it's really easy actually. Um, I know what my tech stack is. I know what my tech debt is. And despite the fact that there are rows and rows and rows of technology here, most of this stuff won't work with what I have today. And so my first filter, if you will, is in light of my tech debt, in light of what I have today to work with, what can I augment and what can I do? And
Mhm.
so it's a very quick filter that goes through hundreds of different technologies that might be available to you at the some massive show like the National Restaurant Association show. Um, that will very quickly narrow it down to maybe a dozen or so that you need to pay attention to and the like. But what's really also interesting about it too, as well, is that it is an iterative process. It is a process by which you're looking at not only what am I able to do, but how can I create additional business capacity with what I'm able to do. And so what I mean by that is that a tech strategy in many cases is trying to create the ability to create additional capacity for the next year or the subsequent years too as well. So in many cases, I would say innovation starts with basically an internal assessment of all the technologies that you have. It is quite remarkable how many brands are sitting on technologies that they're actually not fully using. That they may have 40, 50 different types of technologies in their pocketbooks, and 5 or 10 of them actually or 3 or 4 of them may actually do the same kinds of things. And there's an opportunity and an ability to actually save money by getting rid of the excess technology that you don't need. I had another meeting earlier with an executive where he's saying, I start with my people and making sure that that what I'm doing with the people first makes sense, and then I augment their skills with the technology. And in many cases, the new technology plays don't make sense because the processes aren't available to take
Mhm.
advantage of the additional capacity or additional capabilities. So take a step back and say, maybe the first place is take inventory of what you have,
Yeah.
eliminate the things that are repetitive or overlapping. That can actually save money, create funds to actually that can be reinvested now to buy appropriate technologies that actually fit the bill. I think another place to focus a lot of attention on, though, is on the regulations and the risk, in part because these are areas where you have no choice. And what's really interesting to me about the past year and the past couple of years, I would say, is how the compliance and the cybersecurity threats, take those as examples, have actually been opportunities to actually justify investments that otherwise wouldn't be made into the retail store operations and the like. So, for example, you take something like data privacy. Data privacy, most of the regulations that are coming out, and they're coming out very quickly as they spread gradually over state by state and the like, include this right to be forgotten. I, as a consumer, have a right to tell a retailer, I want you to forget me. So get rid of my data. And the obligation in most of these regulatory requirements is that that retailer then agrees that within a reasonable time frame, a few days, they will get rid of you. They will eliminate all knowledge of you. Now, what happens in a data breach where there's some server that gets compromised that somebody forgot about, and lo and behold, my data was on that server, and now I have to go through the rigmarole of changing all my credit cards and my bank statements. And I'll go back to that retailer saying, "Here's my email. I told you to forget about me. Why is it that I have to go through this rigmarole because of this data breach?" So there is a high level of accountability with these regulations. They're not just what if scenarios because breaches happen so frequently. If someone is, claiming the rights of data privacy, there's a meaningful obligation for retailers to adhere to that. And it's not a small thing. It means that there needs to be one centralized version of all that data and nowhere else. So that when you hit the delete on that centralized location, it's gone. It's gone from your system. It's gone from your supplier systems too as well. And so these kinds of requirements require technical upgrades, re-architectures, remodeling of your technical infrastructure and these are because of the tangible fees that are associated with them. It's an easy ROI to build that says basically I need the dollars and I need the investment in order to comply with these requirements. So regulatory requirements are areas where you don't have a choice. You have tangible fees that will be paid if you're found to be non-compliant. I think another area in addition to data privacy that particularly for 2024 that will get a lot of attention is the PCI 4.0. I think what's really important to understand there is PCI, the prime motivation of this is that this is essentially the credit card companies trying to reduce the amount of fraud that's out there so that they don't have to take on that fraud obligation. So they have done some meaningful things to upgrade the cybersecurity posture. They have a vested interest. If there is fraud in your stores, they don't want to be responsible for it. And so they want to make sure that you're doing, as retailers and restaurants, what you're supposed to be doing from a reasonable due care perspective, from a cybersecurity posture perspective. And if you're found not doing those things, then it's going to be your fault. It'll be your responsibility for the losses that take place and the like. And so with PCI 4.0, we see not only new requirements, authenticated scans, automated reviews of the logs, we see old requirements being clarified. The access to the cardholder data environment is going to extend the scope of the CDE, of the PCI scope. And so this is going to actually bring on new requirements and introduce perhaps new technologies like validated P2PE to try to reduce the scope of that PCI obligation and the like. So, a couple of things when we think about tech strategies, we want to reduce consolidate where possible, because if there's excess technologies that's not making a meaningful business, we want to eliminate those so that we can take the funding of those and apply that to our next generation. We want to focus on the regulatory risk from a regulations perspective, data privacy, PCI, from a cybersecurity perspective that has all those implications of a data breach and the like. And then finally, I would say that we're looking for ways where we can actually have an outsized benefit from a modest investment. And the idea is, where can I spend the least amount of money to make the most business impact so that I can create future capacity for more digital transformation later on. Maybe I can't afford it all the things that I want to do today, but how can I improve? How can I make certain investments that will have an outsized benefit so that tomorrow I'll have the ability to afford the new investments that need to be done down the road. And then lastly, I would just say that you do want to pay attention to the disrupting technologies. You do want to pay attention to the tension points that are inherent in a lot of these tech strategies. One way to think about that is, for example, we think about the need to personalize the customer experience. Well, to personalize the customer experience, I need lots and lots of data. But then at the same point, when I have lots and lots of data, I've increased my liability now with all this data.
So on the flip side of it is, from a cybersecurity posture perspective, I don't want any more data than I absolutely need to. And so it's in those tension points of where I need enough to personalize the experience, and I want as little as possible so that I minimize my exposure from a cybersecurity risk perspective too as well. It's these areas that will require some additional thinking in terms of what's right for your company.
Wow, Tim, again, that's a lot, right? Going back to keeping data secure, they're making sure you have the right cybersecurity in place. And there's the classic scenario of a CIO going to the board and saying, we need $800,000, $300,000, whatever the number is, to implement the proper security procedures and get the proper applications for NDR, XDR, all the detection and responses that are out there. And the board says, no, we can't afford that right now. We're focused on increasing our revenue. And then 6 months later, the CIO comes back and says, well, we've been hacked. We're now a victim of ransomware. And here's a Bitcoin invoice from the hackers, from the ransomware, for $8 million. And they'll have no problem writing that check just to stay in business. And taking that one step further, many companies are now seeing the cybersecurity and other applications that help run their business as truly a competitive advantage over what their competitors are doing, right? From a compliance standpoint, from a breach standpoint, from a protecting the brand name, the franchisees, their name, and ultimately their mutual customers, the end customer that comes into the location.
I would like to take a minute to talk about the breach, right? So much we say it, so often we will say it's not a matter of if, it's when it happens. Some things to think about as it relates to data breaches. I had a real good friend of mine. Unfortunately, he's the CIO of a large restaurant brand who had to go through a data breach. They got breached. They had to publicly acknowledge and apologize to their customers, and they had to go through all the rigmarole. I was asking him if what happened, and what was his experience like, and it was really quite surprising, actually. I saw this actually at the RSA conference earlier in the spring too as well. When you look at the types of cybersecurity executives that most businesses are looking for, they actually are looking for people who have actually been seasoned and have experience of going through a breach. They want CIOs who have been through a breach and who actually know what to do and know how to handle it too as well. And what was interesting for my friend is that, when he had the breach, it wasn't it was quite the opposite. It wasn't I'm concerned that I'm going to lose my job because now it's on me. I'm going to be the scapegoat. It was quite the opposite. It was, he became the best buddy of his CEO. He was in his office all the time, always being asked, what is it that you need? What is it that you want? And how do we get through this and the like? And so that data breach was actually a milestone moment in his career and his relationship with his executive office, because at that point now he suddenly became the first priority in the business, and realizing that, hey, this is a threat to our business, it's a threat to our existence, and it needs to be properly handled and dealt with then too as well. And so there are many cases when it comes to data breaches that it actually becomes an opportunity actually for a competitive advantage. The other thing that I would say is, right now, we are looking at the average cost of, globally anyways, of a data breach around $4.5 million. What's remarkable about that is it's not just take it or leave it $4.5 million. There are things that you can do to prepare to improve your posture before it. If you have an incident response time plan, if you regularly exercise your incident response plan, you can reduce the $4.5 million by about $1.5 million. So that $4.5 million on average comes down to about $3 million if you're practicing regularly a well-defined incident response plan. Another way you can reduce it is if you incorporate DevSecOps in your software and application developments. That can knock off $1.7 million. There are things that you can fail to do that will increase the cost. So if the average cost of a data breach is $4.5 million, it might cost you $1 million more if you take too long to detect that breach. The average detection of a breach is 204 days. If you can detect a breach in less than 200 days, you can knock off another $1 million or so. too as well. So you have a say in how a data breach impacts your business. There's things that you can do to prepare for it, to moderate the cost of a breach. It's not just whenever it happens, it happens. Of course, with PCI 4.0, there are all of these other additional steps that can be taken to reduce the probability of a breach in the first place.
So again, we've talked about a lot, and your knowledge is very impressive. I know that you travel the circuit and go participate in all the associations, organizations, speaking on panels, etc. With everything that's been said, where does a company go to get help? Where do they go to take the next step to understand what they have is great and they're covered? What they don't have is they don't know what they don't know. What are some suggestions for taking that next step?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of different ways to answer that questions. Some of the things that I would share with you is, the conferences, as I alluded to before, are great
Mm.
places whenever you can afford them, whenever you can, to take the time to kind of participate in them. I would tell you that the trade associations, these committee meetings from Connexus, the Restaurant Technology Networks, and others, where you have the National Retail Federation has a number of IT work groups as well. Whenever there's a gathering of IT executives and they're sharing and they're trying to develop standards and develop white papers and the like, these are excellent opportunities to gain from the knowledge of the community and to be able to learn from each other too as well. I'll tell you another thing that I do because I'm, like everybody else, we have limited budgets, and yet I want to have an understanding of the market that exceeds my budget. A lot of what I do is I will I'll take the phone calls. A lot of my colleagues and a lot of my peers will talk about how they just can't answer their phone anymore because there's too many marketing calls and the like. I go the opposite direction as my schedule allows me to. I take as many of those vendor calls as I possibly can because these are suppliers, technology providers that are that are trying to uh, monetize a technology solution in the marketplace. So the conversation is usually less about what they're selling and more about what they know about the marketplace and the like. But I find that to be a very available source of information in terms of what's happening in the market, what kind of pain points, what kind of threats exist out of there, and the like. And so there are opportunities like that. But I would say that the trade associations and those committee meetings, those are the ideal scenarios where you have peers from the industry in conjunction with suppliers from the market coming together and leveraging their collective understanding of where technology is, what the needs of the industry are, and putting it together to try to solve the problems and the like. And so I think those associations are very available. In many cases, it's a minimal cost for a retailer or for restaurant executives to participate. I think when we think about getting help, what I encourage retailers and restaurants to do is take a sober assessment of your internal capabilities, understand where the gaps are, and either look to find ways to either augment your internal capabilities or
Mhm.
simply buy the capabilities. There are multitudes of service providers out there. Most retailers and restaurants are understaffed from a technology IT staff perspective. And so what little staff they do have needs to be applied to where it makes the most competitive advantage. So the meat and potatoes of, running a network, keeping it up and running, the 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 mundane type activities, look to offload that off your people so they can focus on the things that bring you a true competitive advantage that are unique to your business, and let the generic stuff offload that to a managed service provider and allow them to kind of take that burden off. The ideal there is that because a managed service provider, that's all they do, that's where their core competence is. In many cases, they've made investments that allow them to have an even deeper understanding of what's
Mhm.
going on in your network at scale with automated resources. So in many cases, it's a very easy ROI that says, I could spend the dollars to try to bring in in-house resources, or a fraction of those dollars and get actually an even higher quality service above and beyond what I'm able to do by myself.
Fantastic. So we have a couple questions coming in, and we'll get to those very briefly. But I'd like to go through some key takeaways from everything that we talked about today. And I jotted some notes down during this, so you want to make sure that I get this all out, is leveraging the frameworks that you have to conduct a comprehensive assessment. Look at what you have, make sure that you're using what you have, focus on some areas that you can improve, whether it's with cybersecurity, with automation, with using and with mining and using your data, those that require the least amount of investment that will get you some pretty big benefits coming out of it, right? Looking to manage business risk with the digital dependency. I say digital dependency, but it's really what we talked about, what you talked about, Tim, early on, which is looking at where in the store are the risks. Is it interacting with customers? Is it making enough widgets in the back of house to serve the customers in front? Then moving over to cybersecurity, cyber threats, making sure that everyone in the company that this affects has a practice to response, also called a tabletop exercise, where everyone gets together, and it can be for a day, could be for a week, it could be for just a couple of hours. Then wrapping up here, assessing your internal capabilities and competencies, and supplementing where you don't have a core competency. That's where MSPs, MSSPs come into play. It's the whole classic business case of make or buy, right? You either bring it in-house and have it as an employee, or you hire an outside party to come in and let them do what they're experts at, so that you can run your business. And of course, the external threats of regulations, compliance, market forces, et cetera. There's a question that's been sitting here for a while. It's gotten a couple thumbs up that I'd like to ask you, Tim. And this is, a 30,000 foot level that you can drill down as much as you like. But what do you see as the biggest disruptor for 2024, for next year?
It's not as exciting as maybe one would imagine, right? I think there's some really interesting things that are taking place in the AI world, right? So with ChatGPT, and then more recently this past week, the Google releasing Gemini kind of really opens your mind to what where the future is, and kind of what's potential and what's possible. I think, though, that what's also really interesting, though, is when we look at signs of retraction too, as well, where things are not really what they seem to be. So, for example, I think a few days ago, it was really interesting to hear that Ford is going to be cutting their EV manufacturing forecast in half, because EVs apparently are not, buying, the market demand for them is not as great as Ford was expecting them to. There are those kinds of market signals that are kind of interesting and worthy of paying attention to, because you don't want to get too far ahead of technology. So for that question, as I was thinking about the biggest disruptors for next year, it's not particularly exciting, but I think it's going to be particularly devastating. It'll be the combination of ChatGPT and phishing. I think that we're going to see a whole nother level of engagement, where of difficulty now, in terms of, just you think about it's an ability. It's really twofold. It's an ability to execute personalized messages at scale. It's really two parts, right? It's being able to execute the messaging at scale, and then personalizing that messaging on top of it together. It's those two together that are going to be particularly devastating. It's already been I'm particularly interested in how, ChatGPT originated messages are getting more clicks than your generic marketing emails are getting. So they're already proving to be more effective in getting people to open the emails and the like. And you can only imagine when you have the ability to scrape someone's publicly available social media feed, to be able to understand what kind of messages you need to write to them to get them to open that email and to click on that email. And so when I look at all these kind of it's these kinds of scenarios where I think the biggest caution is we are becoming a heavily digitally dependent marketplace society, And in many cases, for many retailers and restaurants, the business value of the digital dependency, the business value of what is digitally dependent of their business, didn't say that right, is outweighed by their investment in their defenses and their protections. And because of that, because there's so much value in terms of the business, and there's a meaningful gap into the protections that they have put in place from a cyber defensive posture, there's an enormous opportunity to monetize that by the bad actors. And so my encouragement is for everyone to be thinking soberly about how much their business has grown, how dependent they are digitally on from a profit perspective. You can do offline credit card transactions. You can't do offline mobile orders. So if 70% of your business is coming through mobile orders, if your network goes down and the like, you're not going to get 70% of your business. So thinking through those use cases and those scenarios of how digitally dependent have you become on your infrastructure, and what are you doing to protect it? What are you doing to improve its resilience, its availability, and its performance too as well? It's not always just about a network going down. It's just as bad as if it's too slow or too congested. That irritating slow internet connection at home becomes devastating if it happens during peak busy hours where you have customers waiting to give you money and they can't because it's taking too long to do the credit card transactions. So it's these kinds of things, very ordinary, very known problems that are going to become more disruptive as the business becomes more digitally dependent. And when you think about that, it's the meat and potatoes part of the business, not the do I need Gemini in my customer engagement or call center yet or not, and the like. I do see lots and lots of opportunities for those. I'm very excited about it, but there's so much of the ordinary stuff that's not being done today that it really doesn't make sense to talk about the next gen stuff yet.
Wow. I completely agree with that. And let me take, before we conclude here, let me take just a few minutes, if I may, and talk with you a little bit about Hughes, who we are, and Tim and I are both on the marketing side, so we're resources. People come to us with questions. We have a lot of resources out on our webpage, hughes.com. If you're on the franchise side of the business, hughes.com/franchise, on the retail side /retail. We're a multi-billion-dollar company based outside of Washington, D.C. in Germantown, Maryland. We've been around for over 50 years. We have scores of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of locations under management that we work with on a routine basis. We provide managed security services. We're a managed services provider, a managed security services provider. We do digital media, digital signage. You walk into restaurants and you see the digital menu boards. So they're all managed from one location. You can keep all the pricing up to date and have that all done by our back end portal. Tim, you mentioned a portal earlier in the conversation, and that used to be something that was a competitive advantage, but now everyone is coming out with portals to make it easier on their customers, and just something I wanted to touch on. So before we conclude, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to Tim or to me individually if you like. We can be found on LinkedIn, or just reach out to us directly. We also attend a lot of industry events throughout the year. The next one we have coming up is NRF, National Retail Federation, coming up in January in New York. Then we will both, along with others from Hughes, be at the International Franchise Association, their show in February. So I'm sure we'll run into many of you there. Reach out to us, and we look forward to connecting with you. Tim, any concluding comments you'd like to send us off with?
No, thank you very much. It's been a great help, a great opportunity to speak with you. Very much appreciate the time, and look forward to future opportunities to engage.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone. Be well.